If you find you're unsettled listening today, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com and click on resources.
We are men in the trades, forging health in the drug poisoning crisis. This is
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk.
Hey, it's Karen flying solo today. Daniel's off, and I'm here conversing with Colby and Greg. Let's jump in. So we are here today with two of the guys from the Tailgate Toolkit. Did I say that right?
You did. You nailed it.
Yeah, it's tough. There's a lot of T's. It throws me off all the time.
Exactly. So, what is this project and how did it come to be? And yeah, just tell us all about it. Either one of you, whoever wants to talk.
I think Colby's most equipped for that.
The Tailgate Toolkit is an education and awareness program. So what we do is we offer a number of services that are really intended to spread awareness about what's going on with the drug poisoning crisis in BC, how it's impacting the construction industry, and what tools we can use to increase safety, increase support, and break down stigma. So we provide on-site presentations to get the conversation started, training for supervisors. We have a support group that meets virtually. It's called Hammer Time. That's another choice branding decision.
Yeah.
We also provide printed resources to have on site. So this project began initially in 2021. The Vancouver Island Health Authority, in response to a report from the BC Coroner Service that pointed out that construction and trades are kind of the highest represented sector when it comes to drug poisonings.
Mm-hmm.
In response to that report, Island Health approached the Vancouver Island Construction Association, saying, let's partner up. What can we do about this? So in 2021, we launched a pilot project called the Tailgate Toolkit. All kind of began by interviewing people on the island within the industry, many of whom had lived or living experience with substance use, many of whom were on the opposite side in terms of, they were employers who had lost people due to this.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked to them and really just asked, what would you like to see? And in response to that, we developed our training and our support group and these resources. So we piloted that for kind of the latter half of 2021. And then in 2022, we received provincial funding from the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions to bring this provincially, which is when Greg was able to come on the team, and he now leads our Lower Mainland kind of coordination.
So Colby, you're based on the island, correct?
I am, yeah, in Victoria.
And then Greg, you're based out of the Lower Mainland?
Yeah, I'm in Vancouver presently, out of the VRCA office.
Awesome. And then do you have other people in other areas of the province as well?
Yes, we so the intention with the provincial funding was to have staff situated in each of the Regional Construction Association offices. As Greg mentioned, he works out of the Vancouver Regional Construction Office. I work out of the Vancouver Island Construction Association, and we are actually currently seeking staff for the Southern Interior and the North. Greg,
do you want to jump in and what have your experiences been with this project? How did you get involved with it?
Cut through the chase, I guess. I'm in my 6th year of recovery, actually. I'm a recovering addict. I had a fairly serious opioid addiction that stemmed from a motor vehicle accident in my late 20s that really sent my life into a bit of a tailspin. I battled it for quite some time. That experience really, it changed my outlook, changed where I wanted to go in life. And going into it was something for so long that I had kept secret. I almost died keeping the secret. For 6 years, I lived with a partner who had no idea that I was addicted to painkillers. Even the people eventually who I was buying the substances off on the streets, I would lie and say I was getting them for other people. I was in such deep denial and hiding this beast of burden. Yeah. So when I go into a job interview and they actually asked me outright if I had any lived experience with substance use, it was my instinct almost to say, no, it's not something that I really wanted to share.
Not
exactly.
Here.
But as I sat with Amy, and who ended up hiring me, I just got this feel that this was the type of person that I could open up and be transparent with. So I took my shot. And for the first time in my life, I led with, my story, my absolute truth. And to my surprise, I was rewarded for it. I think that's probably what got me the job.
Mm-hmm.
And to be quite honest, is probably what has benefited me the most in the field. Being able to lend my experience, I think, has created a transparency because it's kind of, my pound of flesh. And once I disclose that, especially to men, you kind of gift them that vulnerability.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
right. And we have our talks are, there's certain stuff we have to hit, right? But I like to illustrate what I'm talking about with real life situations. And unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, I can kind of illuminate a lot with personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
the death of my fiance,
Mm-hmm.
the death of
Sorry.
friends, that isolation, the stigma, all these things. And I just find once I do lead with that in the talks themselves, it does create an atmosphere and a discourse among the people who attend where they're a lot more likely to share. So long story short, that's how I got the job. And honestly, something that I almost died trying to protect my addiction for so long before it got to
Mm-hmm.
the point where you can deny, you're 127 pounds. It had been years and it had spiraled to such a way there was no hiding it. But for me to just, be out with it and to be rewarded with a really gratifying, kind of life-changing experience in a lot of ways. It's really ironic. This thing that like I said, that I protected with my life now benefits me, and hopefully it helps other people a little bit.
My curiosity is around, do people feel safe enough to actually share what's on their hearts?
So I'll share this with you. In the beginning stages of every talk, I always lead with a simple question, and that is, how many of you have been affected by this opioid crisis that we hear so much about in the media, indirectly or directly? And about half the hands usually go up. There's some trepidation, they slowly creep up, and then usually about half the room. And then I go into my talk, right? It gets very personal. It's never easy. It's always hard every time. I have a water bottle with me today because my mouth gets dry because
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting talking to you about this, Karen, and it still makes me feel like I'm less than you because I'm sharing this bit of my
Mm-hmm.
history. It makes me feel dirty or inferior in a way. It shouldn't. I've gone back to school. I've facilitated groups. I've given countless talks, spoken to over 1,000 people in the industry, and yet I still have this. So I can only imagine how hard it would be for a guy who's not trained in this field, working
Mm-hmm.
40 hours a week, to go to his employer and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like, I'm struggling, like I have a problem, fear of losing their job, fear of repercussions. And at the end of the 45-minute talk, it happens every talk, the room will slowly clear out. However, there'll be a couple scragglers, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5, sometimes just one. And they wait until I'm about to leave, and then they come up and talk to me.
Yeah, because it's
And
safer then, way
they're
safer.
safer,
Yeah.
absolutely. And they'll talk about themselves, their struggles, or their partner, or a roommate, a brother. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the same story about, someone I know and love was doing so well. They had a drug issue, and for a year they were, in recovery and doing well. Everything was going so great, and they had one bad day, and they went out, used, no tolerance, and now they're no longer with us again
Mm-hmm.
and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed this pattern. And now to go back to the beginning of the talk where I ask everyone to raise their hands, I started noticing the people who weren't raising their hands, that half of the room, those 4 or 5 people who came to talk to me after the meetings were
Mm-hmm.
always from that group that didn't initially raise their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how else you can better articulate the effect of the program than that. If you want to quantify the results, the fact that these people couldn't even put up their hands in a room are
Yeah.
comfortable enough after 45 minutes to disclose like really deep, heartfelt vulnerability. And that's such a compliment to the program that Colby helped build,
Mm-hmm.
played a big part in, and the program that I get to facilitate.
We wouldn't have any presentations if there weren't leaders who are out there in the industry who want to take this on, who acknowledge that this is a real issue that's impacting the workforce, that understand that ultimately our goal is safety, right? And we do that through education. We do that by breaking down stigma and opening up these conversations and providing some tools to just increase safety, and that's ultimately our goal. Now, the truth is, of course, we've gotten pushback. There are companies who will immediately tell you that it's not a problem on their work site. that their staff are always fit for duty, and they always make sure they are. But no employer can know that for sure. And we understand that there's such a range of ways in which people are using recreationally, whether it's someone experiencing substance use disorder. You can't know, and the risk is still very high. We have a training program that's specifically for leadership, and we actually provide incentives to get people into that program. It's accredited, so we offer residential building points, we offer gold seal credits, and it's amazing how many people come through. And you do get a variety. You get people who understand that this is an issue, want the skills to address it, want to support their team. And then you get a mixture of folks who are there for the credits, or their boss signed them up for this. But it is always amazing to see the progress from day one to the end of the course.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people who come in and they're like, oh, my boss signed me up because I must be firing too many people.
Mm-hmm.
That
one comment says so much right there about what's actually going on. And it's not that anybody's bad in the situation. It's that we don't have the tools. We don't even have the language. We don't have the concepts to be able to navigate the situation. And that's the beauty of the Tailgate Toolkit and this podcast project, is that that's what we're wanting to do. And that's why we were really excited about being able to work together with you, is like, we need to get just safe places to be able to begin to engage with this content and with this thinking, and just be able to kind of, I always use the word deconstruct, but like just to kind of take it apart with compassionate curiosity, like without judgment. So nobody's doing anything wrong here. It's that we need to just educate ourselves better and develop the language. So that's fantastic.
It's such a wide-ranging, nuanced issue, and to reduce it to simple terms just isn't responsible. And and people want to be able to do that, and when they can't, they get frustrated. So it's easier to put their head in the sands at times. But for every person that does that, there's been so many leaders in this industry who have taken upon themselves to, bring us in. Man, I just see a shift of people who really care about their guys and girls, in the industry. And I take their calls off hours on weekends because they care. They'll tell me about a run-in they had on the streets with someone who looked to be under the influence and how they could have handled it better. I wonder if he, needed naloxone. They're calling me after hours on that stuff. And that, that's how you change culture. And that's such a big part of what we're doing. And like you said, language matters so much. And like Colby takes care of that so masterfully in the supervisor training. Like even sitting here, you'll never hear Colby or I, at least intentionally, say the term overdose, right? Because it implies a recklessness that you're doing too much. And that's simply not the case, And that's why I always tell them a story about, it's 22 years ago, my best friend died right in front of me. He didn't do too much. He was the guy who used cocaine every couple months. And this one day, he went to a person he wasn't familiar with to get that cocaine, unbeknownst to us. And he got some heroin in that cocaine, which he had no tolerance for. And I watched him die. It was just an awful moment. You can't reduce that to, that was someone who just was reckless and had no regard for their health. He was not a drug addict, as, we would like to think of them. And the stock footage that we see every night on the news of the prototypical drug addict, that same person nodding off in the streets, that is not what the majority of people who are suffering right now look like.
In fact, they just released some new information this last week. Dr. Bonnie Henry did, about the fact that it's actually quite a low percentage comparatively of where the overdoses are happening. So most are not happening on the streets in the downtown east side.
Yeah, I think it was Lisa Lapointe had a great quote that was simply, the downtown east side is not the face of this crisis. And there needs to be a change in how we present what is happening, because it's not someone who's unhoused. When we look at the losses that we're seeing, it's predominantly men, many of whom are working in trades. It's the largest represented sector. The majority live in the private residence and are using alone.
This is the mental health crisis of our time. But until we start having the conversations, where people can speak openly about that brokenness that they're feeling, I know in my addiction, I could best describe it now as the pursuit of nothingness. My life did become strictly the pursuit and consumption of substances. And once I consumed, I could enjoy that for 10 minutes because I didn't have to feel the guilt about the fact that my values and my actions no longer aligned, that I was now a dishonest person who was doing things I never thought I would do to supply, my dependence. The clock would start running again because I know after that 10 minutes or 20 minutes of nothingness, I'm on the clock again and I need to feed that habit. And I think something that we miss because we only get the fatality numbers is the amount of people, second and third hand, the exponentiality of this crisis, right? Because for every person affected, there are so many lives, every life that they touch, right? Anyone that is close to them, their life is diminished in some capacity because of that. So you have not just people struggling with addiction, but people struggling with the addiction of a child, a loved one, showing up on a work site, you know what I mean? Sometimes doing dangerous jobs, and their mind can't be present. They can't be their best selves. Like I've seen it from both angles. I have seen people take their, the groups that I ran, their clean time. I don't like the word clean, but to honor
Sobriety.
that sobriety time, 1 or 2 years. And in those occasions, they bring family members and friends to celebrate that. And you get a real feel how, man, it's not just their life that was saved. Every life that they come into contact with, because they are a better person today, is a bit better off for knowing them. And I can speak to that. I really think that I'm a net positive to people, where if you would have asked me 7 years ago, I would have said that I'm a bad person and I've diminished every life that I have come into contact with. That also fed the isolation because I knew that my addiction made me an undesirable who was kind of contagious to everyone. So I stayed away. But, I just say that because we get so wrapped up in the number of deaths, but there's so many tentacles to this.
And I know parents who have lost their adult children to this, but they don't talk about it because, and it's just this mysterious thing that happened and they don't want to even bring it up because like when a loved one passes, it's often very healthy for us to talk about them and to process the whole thing socially. But they can't even bring up the fact that their child died. They just have to pretend that nothing happened because there's so much stigma attached to it.
Yeah, it's unimaginable, the idea of not being able to share your grief.
Yeah.
Especially for the loss of a child.
There's an organization that is so incredible that we've had the chance to work with, Moms Stop the Harm.
Yes.
That have been taking a lot of action across Canada, and it is made up of people who have lost family to this and are finding a place where they can share their grief and take action in response. It amazes me when we do hear really stigmatizing language, and you can see that people can't put this in the context of you're speaking about a person who has family, who have people who care about them, and who are suffering loss, on such a scale. When we talk about this representation in the industry as well, we're talking to companies and people who, Greg's question of how many of us are connected to this, we're seeing that loss and that grief across the industry as well.
I think one of the questions people might have approaching your program, if they don't know very much about it and if they don't have an experience, is they might be asking themselves, is this bullshit or is this legit? And that's where the authenticity of both the way that you approach Tailgate Toolkit and the way people engage with you. And that's why like your opening question is important. And, Greg, when you're sharing personally, that is so important for people to understand, like, this is authentic. This is something that we need to engage with as our real selves, not the people that we think we're supposed to be.
Absolutely. We talk about stigma. We talk about how men are disproportionately affected and why that is. Why is it as men that we could probably all find commonality in the fact that we've all grieved, we've all lost, we've all felt fear, but we never talk about these things. You're too busy chest thumping, right? Something it's true though. And it's always been that way. And the measure of a man is how much you can internalize.
Yeah, that is true. I would say it's also probably connected to the just pressures to continually perform, continually earn, continually be busy as well. Like there's no slack.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, capitalism hasn't become any kinder as of late, and that's creating, I'll be honest, a lot of people feel like fucking failures.
Yeah.
Right. Because we have this, this golden carrot or whatever that we're all chasing. And we feel like failures if we don't grab that brass ring, so to speak. And the fact is, not many people are reaching up to grab that ring these days. So we need to start redefining what success is.
Yeah.
Because something's going on. We're more aware of mental health issues than we've ever been. Yet more people are dealing with mental health crisis today than ever.
I just really want to quickly kind of summarize some of those main points of the toolbox talks. We do talk about the stats. We talk about the impact on the industry, what is happening with the drug poisoning crisis. And we talk about why is this happening? Great point about, the overrepresentation of men. We do see this expectation of toughness and masculinity that prevents people from being vulnerable and asking for help.
The work hard, play hard aesthetic
that's
been championed within the industry.
Exactly. The truth is that there is as much as sometimes we don't like to talk about it, it's an open secret in the industry that we've had a long legacy with substance use, cocaine being quite prevalent, so we try to kind of break down these many things that contribute, such as physical pain, injury, exhaustion, isolation, and that financial stress and hardship as well, when your income is tied to your physical performance. What happens when you do start to experience pain?
Yeah.
You can't take time. You have to medicate.
Yeah.
If you're experiencing emotional hardship, it's the same thing. So we try to break that down. We open up that conversation to the group, and these are not surprises. Everyone offers these suggestions because we know that this is happening. We do talk about how you can use in a safer way, but it is far from the entirety of the talk. It's actually relatively brief. But we understand and we talk about the range of experiences with substance use. Not everyone who uses does experience addiction. And we can't, just narrow the conversation down to that when we are all at risk. Something that I often talk about for people who are resistant to this idea of harm reduction is we have to understand that we don't have the luxury of time. There used to be a process where you could work with somebody through those stages of change, get them the supports, slowly build up a network to get them over that first hurdle. We don't have that anymore. Like you said, it could be someone just recreationally using. It could be kids experimenting. This is harm reduction is kind of the base level of safety that we can offer. So we try to promote that in the talks. There are things that we can do to increase safety. It's not perfect. It's harm reduction, not harm removal. And we provide brochures for the worksite that show, in your area, what are some services for mental health, for pain, for recovery and treatment, and for harm reduction. We have to talk about human rights and workers' rights. And it's something that's very challenging for many employers to kind of to factor in when they also have obligations to safety. But there is the obligation to accommodate somebody when they're experiencing a disability. And it's important to recognize that substance use disorder, addiction, is a protected disability. So something we try to do in the talks is we let folks know that if you are experiencing addiction, you do have a right to some accommodation so that you can receive support. You can go to your employer and disclose that you're having issues with substance use. They can't fire you for that. They have to do everything within reason that they can do to support you. And it's often time off so that you can get treatment.
Yeah.
But your job will be there when you come back. It's something that we try to get a bit more into with the supervisor training, is to give employers a better understanding of that. And also how ultimately, if you have a workplace where someone can disclose that they're having an issue and have it addressed, that's a safer workplace than waiting for that issue to become obvious.
Imagining somebody hearing this and then going and telling their employer, and then they get treated differently, and maybe their employer says, no, I'm not going to do that, you need to get your fucking act together. So the employee then has to go through all these steps and fight with a lawyer and do all that.
Right.
So I just want people to make sure that we're not promising that the employer will be very kind and accommodating, because that doesn't necessarily happen either. And employers probably, if they're not trained in this and they're approached in this manner, they may be like, oh shit, I don't know what to do about this. Like, can't you just like try a little harder? Like, saying things like that to their employees, because they're trying their hardest too, because they're not trained substance use counselors, right? So how the fuck do they know what to do? So I'm glad that we're talking about it. I'm glad that we're laying out pathways, but it's not a super highway yet where you're just able to take the on-ramp, go there, and you're done. You can take care of it. It's still tricky and messy, I would say.
Yeah, it certainly is. There's not a great understanding, and it's not well enforced.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of it. But if we aren't, acknowledging and respecting human rights within the industry, we have a bigger issue at hand.
Absolutely.
So I certainly encourage anyone who is on the employer side to inform yourself and understand there are massive benefits to accommodating, to providing support.
Yeah.
You have a healthier team. In terms of costs, it may seem costly to accommodate someone. There are bigger costs with replacing people.
Yes. Yeah.
And so from a business perspective, from a legal perspective, and then let's just talk about the human perspective.
Yeah.
All right.
These are people who are experiencing a disability. And that's important to recognize. This is legally a health issue. The labor lawyers come in and there are always so many questions. And I do have to acknowledge, we work with Roper Grail LLP out of Vancouver. They've done incredible work partnering with us on this project. And, we get questions because people do want to know, how far do I have to go with accommodation? What are the steps? Duty to accommodate, that accommodation piece. Something that's often not known is duty to inquire. Meaning if you suspect at any point that somebody may have a disability that may impact the safety of the workplace or their safety, you have an obligation to ask. Is there something going on? Do you need to tell us something? So particularly if you recognize that someone may be unfit for work or unfit for duty, if you don't ask that high level question of if is there something else going on, you again have some potential liability when it comes to human rights. If you let someone go without asking if the issues with their performance are due to a disability, it's on you.
Wow.
So there's a lot of obligation on the employer side. And I don't want to come down heavy on employers because, as we've said, there are so many folks in this industry who want to do this, and it's not easy work.
Yeah.
And they're often...
A lot of them want to know how far they can go. It's not how far do they have to go. They want to know how far can I take it in supporting my workers.
I'm wondering if we're gaining any experience through this in supporting employers on how can you adjust your project to accommodate when this comes up. Any pro tips or hacks that we've learned so far?
The best hack or pro tip I've seen kind of offered is estimate for it.
Oh, in your initial project, build
in time. If you're not building in time, there's going to be issues that come up, and it may not be this, but there's always something that comes up. So build in time.
I never thought of that before.
Yeah, we've had so many people who do want to help, and we want to advocate as well for support for employers. Folks are expected to take on this kind of work. They need some help.
Yeah.
So that is something that we'd love to see the provincial government really step up and offer some support.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colby and Greg from the Tailgate Toolkit, for being with us today. And we'll do some more episodes in the future, I'm sure.
For sure. And Colby, do you want to maybe tell people where they could find our program?
Oh, yeah. You can learn more about the Tailgate Toolkit at thetailgatetoolkit.ca.
This has been a Fraser House Society project, hosted by Daniel Snyder co-hosted and produced by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution of Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. Help save lives! Go to tradespodcast.com to find tools and tips to promote the podcast on your site with minimal stressors. Like us on socials, Instagram at offtheclock.toolboxtalk. Send us constructive feedback in any form you'd like, tradespodcast@gmail.com. Help us, help you.